I do. I think New York's a really community-minded place, and I think it's obviously always going to be a draw for terrorism because it's huge and because there's so many people, but I honestly think it's one of the safest cities in the world.
All right, folks, our camera crews went out earlier today, and that's just a little bit of what New Yorkers had to say about the recent events in Paris and safety here at home. We're going to be joined by Michael Rubin, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and senior lecturer at the Naval Postgraduate School Center for Civil Military Relations. But first, let's get a preview of Michael.
How do you define terrorism?
I define terrorism as the deliberate targeting of civilians for political gain. But you're absolutely right. One of the Achilles heels for the West is that we simply don't have a universal definition of terrorism. We use in the West, in the European Union, in the United States and Australia, over 250 different definitions of terrorism, and the United Nations doesn't define it either. We need to start defining what it is so that we can construct a policy to combat it.
All right, Michael joins us now. Michael, welcome. How do we do that?
Well, ultimately, I would say we have to play diplomatic hardball. We shouldn't be giving any country counterterrorism assistance unless they first sign on to a definition which we put forward. We can't defer this to the United Nations because the United Nations couldn't define a paper bag if it was stuck inside one.
Right, and those who commit these acts of terror and those who support them would say this isn't terror, this is justification for either, whatever reason. So, it even has a tough time of our own administration getting the word terror out of their mouths.
Well, it is really sad that we claim it as a great victory now when the White House comes out and actually calls an act of terror rather than workplace violence. But you're absolutely right. So many of our countries, even our allies, take an a la carte approach where terrorism is always bad unless it happens to be for a cause with which they agree. But you take a NATO ally, and I put that in quotes, like Turkey, which now has deep links to Hamas. They shouldn't be getting a single cent of aid until they sign on to a definition of terror, which makes it clear that Hamas, even if they agree with Hamas's genocidal principles, is a terrorist group.
I couldn't agree with you more. NATO should kick them the heck out, especially with all that's happened lately. But let's talk about your piece I saw at commentarymagazine.com about Europe and how they need to reaffirm their identity. I think that was the title, Europe Needs to Reaffirm Its Identity. And you talk about a trip you took to the Netherlands a few years back in 2005, and you found a lot of shocking things going on there.
Well, absolutely right. When we asked people at the Rotterdam City Council, which has a large Muslim population, what does it mean to be Dutch? It was as if they were thunderstruck. They weren't expecting the question. They couldn't answer that. Now, ultimately, what the problem is in Europe, and perhaps increasingly in the United States, is a great deal of moral and cultural equivalence. We don't want to suggest that any other culture or value system is bad. But if we're a nation of immigrants, and there's nothing wrong with that, we also have to be united around shared principles, and that has to be the supremacy of the Constitution in our collective daily lives. Spiritual lives, that's an individual choice, but in the public sphere, the Constitution has to come first and foremost, and we shouldn't have anyone be a citizen who doesn't acquiesce to that.
No, I couldn't agree with you more here. But take a country, well, you want to talk about France, let's talk about France specifically right now. I mean, what do they do? I mean, they're France and Britain, I mean, they're coming up against a country within a country.
Well, you're absolutely right there. And you know what France and Europe in general are going to have to confront is that they have a bubble of elites and a bubble of journalists, which is much more profound than even we have in the United States. All the politicians go to the same schools, and it really is two different societies. They seem much more concerned about the rise of nativism, the rise of conservative parties in countries in Europe that will say enough is enough, we have to have a shared identity, than they are about the threat of Islamist terrorism.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you see hope? I mean, or is the has the door been opened and it can't be closed now?
Well, this is a wake-up call to France. We'll see what will happen. There's never an excuse for retaliation against a community. And what the French government has to act legally, but at the same time, enough with the open doors of immigration, and enough with this idea that you can have birthright citizenship without actually acquiescing to the values which that country is founded upon. And that's true in the United States. It should also be true in France, Germany, and elsewhere.
Right. All right. Great stuff, Michael. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Coming up next, folks, the president of the Catholic League, Bill Donahue, who has made some shocking statements in the wake of the terrorist attack in Paris. We'll talk about it with him. It's coming up next right here on the Steve Malzberg Show.